The tragic circumstances surrounding the death of Charlie Kirk have left an undeniable mark on the political and social landscape, sending shockwaves far beyond Utah, where the shooting took place. News of his passing spread rapidly across television networks, online platforms, and social media feeds, igniting a mixture of grief, disbelief, and heated debate among supporters and critics alike. Charlie Kirk was not just another public figure, he was a polarizing voice who had carved out a significant presence in the American conservative movement. His sudden death in such violent fashion became more than just a headline, it became a defining moment that encapsulated the volatility of modern politics, the risks of living in the spotlight, and the stark realities of violence that can erupt in public life. The details of the shooting have been scrutinized intensely, with eyewitnesses providing accounts that paint a chilling picture of the event. Reports describe a chaotic scene where moments of ordinary interaction turned instantly into horror as gunfire broke the fragile sense of normalcy. Law enforcement swiftly intervened, but by then, the damage had already been done. Emergency services rushed him to a hospital in a desperate attempt to save his life, but despite medical efforts, he was confirmed dead. For those who had long followed his career, this was not just a story about a political commentator, it was a painful reminder of how quickly life can be taken away in an atmosphere charged with hostility. The immediate impact was felt in waves. Within hours of the confirmation, statements poured in from political allies who expressed sorrow and outrage, condemning the act of violence and calling for justice. His opponents, while often critical of his rhetoric, also recognized the tragedy of the situation, with many voicing condolences to his family and acknowledging that political differences must never justify the loss of human life. Across social media platforms, hashtags trended globally, reflecting both the deep divides and the shared shock at what had occurred. Vigils began to appear in Utah and in other states where Kirk had built strong support networks, as people gathered to mourn, to express solidarity, and to confront their own fears about what this event symbolized. The circumstances of his death also thrust questions of security into the spotlight. For years, prominent political figures, commentators, and activists have raised concerns about safety in public spaces, especially when heated rhetoric fuels strong emotions among followers and detractors. Kirk's death in such a violent manner highlighted how fragile these boundaries of safety can be. It served as a reminder that no amount of influence or status can fully shield a person from danger when the climate of discourse turns increasingly hostile. For those in public life, this tragedy underscored the vulnerability that comes with visibility and the risks attached to being a prominent voice in a polarized nation. The human aspect of the tragedy cannot be overlooked. Behind the headlines and political narratives was a family suddenly thrust into grief. Loved ones who knew him not as a political commentator but as a son, a husband, a father, or a friend now faced the unimaginable task of reconciling public spectacle with private loss. The sight of his family members arriving at the hospital, the reports of their grief, and the images of them standing together during press briefings gave the world a sobering reminder that behind every political identity is a human being whose absence leaves a void that can never truly be filled. In this way, the tragedy transcended partisanship, connecting on a universal level of loss, pain, and the vulnerability of life. The reaction from the broader public illuminated the duality of his legacy. To many conservatives, Charlie Kirk was a champion of their values, a young leader who fearlessly articulated views that resonated with a large segment of America. His death represented not only the silencing of a voice but also a disruption in the movement he had helped energize. To critics, while his message was often divisive, the brutality of his death forced them to reckon with the dangers of violence becoming a form of resolution in political disputes. The paradox was clear. His life had been defined by confrontation and sharp rhetoric, but his death exposed a moment where even adversaries could pause to condemn violence and acknowledge the fragility of human existence. As the news cycle unfolded, the circumstances of the shooting also stirred heated debates about the role of rhetoric, the escalation of hostility in political spaces, and the extent to which public discourse has created environments that make such tragedies more likely. Analysts on television debated whether this was an isolated act or part of a broader pattern in a society where political tensions often spill into violence. Commentators emphasized how the hostile environment surrounding political figures has reached dangerous levels, creating a reality where threats are no longer abstract but tangible. The tragedy of Charlie Kirk's death thus became a symbol, not just of a single loss, but of a larger conversation about what kind of nation America is becoming when disagreements increasingly escalate into deadly outcomes. The tragic circumstances also left a lingering sense of uncertainty about the future. For his supporters, his absence created an immediate vacuum, not only in leadership but in voice. Questions emerged about who would step into his role, how his organization and movement would continue, and what kind of ripple effects his death would create in the political landscape. For opponents, the tragedy forced reflection on the nature of engagement, reminding them that disagreement should never cross into violence, and that the humanity of opponents must never be lost in the heat of conflict. The Utah shooting that ended Charlie Kirk's life will be remembered not just for its immediate brutality but for the wave of reactions, reflections, and debates it sparked. The tragic circumstances expose the vulnerability of public figures, the consequences of unchecked hostility, and the profound impact of sudden violence on both personal families and national conversations. It forced both supporters and critics alike to pause, to reflect, and to confront uncomfortable truths about the climate in which America's public figures now operate. The broader implications of political violence in America have come into sharp focus after the shooting that claimed the life of Charlie Kirk. While this tragedy has its own specific details and context, it also fits into a disturbing pattern that has been emerging over the past several years. Political violence, once seen as something rare or extraordinary, has increasingly begun to surface as a frightening reality, reminding citizens that deep divisions in society are not just rhetorical or ideological but can manifest in physical and deadly ways. The killing of a high-profile figure such as Kirk illustrates how dangerous the climate has become and how urgent it is to understand the underlying forces that drive individuals to turn anger into violence. Each act of political violence serves not only as an attack on the individual involved but also as an attack on the democratic system itself, undermining the trust and security upon which civic life depends. In the aftermath of Kirk's death, many Americans were reminded of other incidents where political identities made individuals targets, whether through mass shootings, attempted assassinations, or violent confrontations during protests. The parallels are unsettling. Each instance reflects the same dangerous theme. That disagreements which should remain in the realm of debate, persuasion, and peaceful protest can instead erupt into actions meant to silence or destroy. This shift has profound implications for the way politics is practiced, for the safety of public figures, and for the willingness of ordinary citizens to engage in political discourse without fear. One of the clearest implications is the chilling effect on political participation. When violence enters the equation, it sends a message that stepping into the public arena comes with serious risks. For politicians, activists, journalists, and commentators, this means that their very lives can be endangered simply for expressing views that anger certain individuals. The fear generated by such incidents can discourage talented and capable people from entering public life, leading to a political environment that is not only more dangerous but also less diverse and less representative. If those who might offer fresh perspectives or challenge entrenched positions choose silence over visibility, the entire democratic process suffers. Another implication is the hardening of divisions. Violent acts do not soften the political climate, they intensify it. After events like the Utah shooting, people often retreat further into their ideological camps, interpreting the violence through partisan lenses. Supporters of the victim may frame the event as proof of persecution and an attack on their movement, while critics may question the broader political environment that led to the escalation. Instead of fostering dialogue, violence tends to deepen mistrust, leaving both sides more suspicious of one another and less willing to engage in civil discourse. The cycle of accusation and defensiveness becomes self-perpetuating, creating an atmosphere where reconciliation seems increasingly out of reach. The cultural implications extend beyond politics into the social fabric of the nation. In a society where violence against political figures becomes more common, everyday citizens begin to internalize a sense of instability and fear. This erodes the trust people have in public spaces, in their institutions, and in their communities. Public events that should be celebrations of free expression or opportunities for collective dialogue instead become potential danger zones. Families begin to question whether it is safe to attend rallies or participate in demonstrations. This weakening of civic life slowly chips away at the democratic foundation of the country, leaving citizens not only divided but disconnected from the processes that are supposed to unite them. Media plays a significant role in shaping the implications of such violence. In the wake of tragedies like Kirk's death, coverage often becomes highly polarized. Some outlets focus on condemning the violence outright, while others use the moment to draw attention to the rhetoric and behaviors of the victim or their opponents. This framing influences how the public interprets the event and can either contribute to healing or further inflame tensions. The broader implication here is that political violence is not simply about the physical act but about the narratives that follow, narratives that shape perceptions of justice, responsibility, and meaning in the aftermath. The issue also raises questions about accountability and prevention. When a political figure is killed in an act of violence, the response from law enforcement and government institutions becomes critical. People look to see whether justice will be swift and fair, whether security measures will be improved, and whether leaders will take meaningful steps to address the climate that allows such violence to occur. If responses are seen as inadequate, it can lead to further erosion of public trust. Citizens may feel that the system cannot protect them or their leaders, fostering cynicism and even more anger. On a psychological level, political violence has ripple effects that extend far beyond the immediate victim or community. It normalizes the idea that force is a valid tool for addressing grievances, subtly lowering the threshold for future acts of aggression. The more frequently society witnesses such acts, the more desensitized it becomes, and the easier it is for extremists to justify new violence in the name of their cause. This normalization is perhaps one of the most dangerous implications, because it transforms isolated tragedies into part of a broader culture of hostility that threatens the very idea of peaceful coexistence. The killing of Charlie Kirk, therefore, must be seen not only as an individual tragedy but as part of a broader phenomenon that forces Americans to confront uncomfortable truths. It reveals the fragility of democratic life when divisions are allowed to escalate unchecked, and it challenges citizens and leaders alike to reflect on the consequences of words, actions, and the tone of public discourse. Political violence disrupts more than lives. It destabilizes the principles of safety, civility, and dialogue that are supposed to hold a society together. Reflecting on division, dialogue, and the path forward after the shooting that claimed the life of Charlie Kirk requires more than surface-level analysis. This moment, as tragic and polarizing as it is, presents a critical opportunity to ask what kind of society we are shaping and what values will guide us moving ahead. Division in American politics is nothing new, but the depth and intensity of the current climate have reached unprecedented levels. The reality that ideological disagreements now too often carry the shadow of potential violence is proof of how far the divisions have deepened. Reflecting on this division does not mean ignoring legitimate political differences but rather confronting the way in which those differences have been weaponized, turning debate into hostility and conversation into confrontation. One of the key elements of this reflection lies in understanding how dialogue has been replaced with shouting matches, both literally in the streets and metaphorically across online platforms. Instead of exchanging ideas with the intent to understand or persuade, discourse has been consumed by a culture of winning and defeating the other side. In this zero-sum environment, political opponents are no longer simply people with different perspectives, they are cast as existential threats. This demonization is fertile ground for division to grow unchecked, and in such a climate, acts of violence begin to seem like an extension of words rather than an unimaginable step beyond them. The tragic end of Kirk's life underscores the need to rethink how dialogue is conducted and how leaders, media, and citizens can shift toward a more constructive form of engagement. The path forward demands a reassertion of the value of dialogue as a tool not just for persuasion but for coexistence. Dialogue does not mean agreement, nor does it mean watering down convictions, but it does require a willingness to recognize the humanity of those on the other side. It is possible to condemn views without dehumanizing the person who holds them, yet the political climate in recent years has often abandoned this principle. If there is to be progress, both leaders and citizens must resist the temptation to treat adversaries as enemies beyond redemption. Only when dialogue is rooted in respect can it serve as a counterforce to division. This path is not an easy one, especially given the role of media and social platforms in amplifying outrage. The algorithms that drive much of the public conversation thrive on anger, controversy, and sensationalism, incentivizing conflict rather than understanding. To move forward, there must be a conscious effort from both institutions and individuals to resist this cycle. Media organizations must take responsibility for the tone they set, and citizens must be willing to question the sources they consume and the narratives they amplify. Without a deliberate attempt to change the patterns of dialogue, division will only deepen, and the risks of further violence will remain high. The importance of reflection also lies in acknowledging the human cost of division. The death of Charlie Kirk is a sobering reminder that behind political battles are individuals whose lives can be upended or ended by the escalation of hostility. Families grieve, communities fracture, and the sense of national unity grows weaker with each violent act. To honor that human cost, reflection must turn into tangible change. This means not only condemning violence after it occurs but addressing the cultural and political currents that allow it to flourish in the first place. Building a path forward also requires leadership that prioritizes healing over scoring points. In times of division, leaders have a choice. They can exploit tensions for short-term gain, or they can guide people toward dialogue, even at the expense of popularity. True leadership is measured by the ability to rise above the noise, to remind citizens of shared values, and to create spaces where disagreements can coexist without descending into violence. In reflecting on this moment, there is a call for leaders on all sides to reimagine their roles not as warriors in a perpetual battle but as stewards of a fragile democracy that requires protection from within. For ordinary citizens, the path forward is equally demanding. It calls for self-examination, for questioning how personal behaviors contribute to the broader culture of division. It requires restraint in conversations, courage in standing against hatred, and empathy in recognizing the fears and frustrations of others, even when those others stand on the opposite side of political divides. Citizens must be willing to bridge small divides in everyday life, to foster community where division seeks to dominate. These small acts of dialogue and connection, multiplied across a nation, can serve as the building blocks for larger societal healing. The reflection on division must also include consideration of systemic issues that intensify polarization. Economic inequality, cultural fragmentation, and the erosion of trust in institutions all feed into the current climate of hostility. If these root causes remain unaddressed, efforts at dialogue will struggle to take hold. Thus, the path forward must include not only a cultural change in how people interact but also concrete steps to address the material and structural issues that make individuals feel unheard, marginalized, or desperate. A society that fails to address these deeper fractures risks perpetuating cycles of resentment that fuel both division and violence. Ultimately, reflecting on the division highlighted by Kirk's death means recognizing the urgent need to reclaim dialogue as the foundation of democracy. It means accepting that disagreement will always exist but that violence must never be allowed to replace words as the means of engagement. It means building a path forward rooted in respect, empathy, and the shared understanding that the survival of the nation depends not on one side defeating the other but on both sides finding ways to coexist. The tragedy in Utah has forced this conversation into the open, and the path forward now depends on whether America is willing to confront its divisions honestly and commit to rebuilding dialogue before further lives are lost to the silence of violence.